list Q&A at the end, because we will have kind of dedicated Q&A at that portion of time. We'll also do a little bit of a poll for you all, just to kind of check in on understanding, not a quiz. But I would like to reiterate, let's do questions throughout the process, clarifying questions or sharing experience. It's not just for the end. So please don't hesitate to raise your hand or put a question in the chat as we're going through. All right. So let's start with code review. I just like to give this context. We've been in this world for a while. Many of us have been working in the energy industry for a while, or some folks are just kind of engaging now. But just some context of the energy code. You can see in the graphic below, it's a stepwise progression, right? We're used to these 3-year code cycle updates. And I just put in some of the key things that many of us may have navigated from 2013, if you recall, when we had new software, to 2016 with a PV credit. Now we're in 2019 code where we have required PV for low-rise residential. We also have storage credit, right? And all of this is kind of moving us along this trajectory. You can see where we're looking at residential zero net energy, commercial zero net energy. We've got carbon neutrality up at the top there at 2045. And with kind of intermediate threshold for cleaner energy and reductions of greenhouse gas emissions as we progress up this kind of stairway, right? So really the energy code is, I would say, kind of shifting and adding in greenhouse gas emissions as a metric rather than straight just energy savings, and really looking at kind of how do we structure it to support demand response and grid harmonization, right, in align with these larger policy goals. So the other piece I put in here just to share in terms of kind of the landscape of what's happening with the energy code, we're going to be talking about the straight energy code as it is, but just some context for you that there are jurisdictions that are going above the energy code, and you may be seeing this, and it kind of requires a different look at the CF1R modeling. And just for some context, there's 40 jurisdictions to date that have adopted something above our base energy code as adopted by the commission, from anywhere from electric preferred to all electric. So that's just a heads up. It may be you may be running into that in different jurisdictions. Oh, speaking of different jurisdictions, this is one thing I forgot to say right in the beginning. So I'm going to pause right here and catch myself. If you wouldn't mind, please put your role and the jurisdiction you're from in the chat. That's super helpful because then we have a sense of like, oh, great, we've got a number of plans examiners or building inspectors or consultants, and we can kind of get a sense of our audience. So that would be really fantastic if you can do that. So go ahead, put your jurisdiction in there and your role within that jurisdiction. That's really great for us to get a sense of who we have in the audience. So you can go ahead and do that while I continue giving the code overview. So as we think about the code, again, we have a couple different compliance options that we want to kind of talk through. First, regardless of compliance option, we have our mandatory measures, right? Those are the minimum requirements that always must be met, like such as pipe insulation is just an easy to point to example there, right? So regardless of your compliance pathway, mandatory measures as they apply to that scope of work in that project are required to be met. Then you have your choice of performance or prescriptive. Generally, what we're seeing is the prescriptive is really used for retrofits or alterations or kind of single measure change out, something pretty simple, versus like new construction. If we're seeing new construction, I would say 99.9% of the time, we're seeing the performance pathway, which requires a modeling and gives you that flexibility to trade off different features from glazing area and impacts of orientation, roof construction, et cetera, right? So we get our kind of trade-off options in the performance for greater flexibility. Right, so that's what we're going to see mostly for new construction, and that's really what we're going to be focusing on today with the CF1R, which is the primary compliance document for new construction. And then just kind of sandwiching that or kind of on top, if you're in a jurisdiction with the REACH code, then that will have some additional requirements and parameters in addition to the base energy code that's required. And so just for some context for you, that's right. Let's just go back for you guys. And thank you, John. I should highlight these more. For the 3C REN area, we have SLO is over here under the electric preferred. And we have OHI over here under all electric. And then we also have the city of Santa Barbara that is in the process of considering all electric and kind of prohibition of gas in new construction. So we've got a couple jurisdictions in the 3C REN territory that have adopted, and ones that are actually considering it and actively engaged in the process right now. So, thanks for making sure I point those ones out. Okay. So mandatory measures, I've kind of already covered this, right? They always must be met. They can show up on the 2R, which is the installation verification forms, and I'll show you those in a moment. They're generally minimum efficiency requirements or controls, pipe insulation, something like that. In addition, as we think about like crawl space insulation, right? I have a minimum I'm allowed to install, but I can kind of trade off within a model if I want. So like R19 may be my minimum that I can install, but I may be trading things off elsewhere. Right, so that's the absolute lowest you can go for certain measures. From the prescriptive approach, I just put this up here. Again, I mentioned that one, we're not going to see a lot of prescriptive approach, but one thing I do want to call out, at least for the 2019, is we now have two packages. One is single family and one is multifamily, so that's new. And then we have, it's a component A package. So there are two prescriptive packages, and these also set the kind of baseline for the project specific modeling if you're undergoing the performance pathway and using the compliance software to demonstrate compliance with the energy code. And here's a performance approach, just a screenshot. This is a screenshot just of one of the softwares that are available that are approved by the CEC. And so you're inputting your specific building, trading off different features to ensure that you get compliance, and producing a CF1R, that is your certificate of compliance that's submitted with your permit, right, to the city. These are also, we'll talk about, we'll touch on really briefly on kind of HERS registries as a tool for jurisdictions, and just as even a tool for HERS raters, really, in terms of that, they're required, but organizing that these CF1Rs are uploaded in there and they become registered. And I'll show you what that is when we dig into the CF1R. So I do want to talk about a couple of, before we get into the compliance process and kind of some of the forms, I do want to call out kind of three major things. And I will say that if you have additional things that you think are kind of important, feel free to put them in the chat and add in. But the three that I was calling out here is for low-rise residential, right? So single family and low-rise multifamily, which means 3 habitable stories or less. We have a minimum required PV. That PV is sized to electrical end use of a mixed-use building, meaning the electrical use of a standard building that has both gas and electric to it. There can be community solar, but it's really on the building. So that's a new thing for the 2019. The other kind of change is energy design rating. You may be familiar with this from the 2016, where we only had one EDR, energy design rating. Now we have two. One is for the efficiency, and it's really to make sure that all of our new construction are hitting minimum efficiency standards. And then we have a total EDR, which allows uh, contributions of PV and or storage or other elements like that to show the performance there. And last but not least, and this is also another large change, is all electric homes are more feasible for low rise at this point, because if any of you did some modeling under 2016 and it was an all electric building, it used to be compared to a mixed fuel building, which made it really hard to comply. Now under 2016, the all electric building is compared to an all electric baseline. So that is a big shift that allows a lot easier compliance from 2016 to 2019. And so that may be useful, particularly if you're working with clients who are like, yeah, we tried that and we couldn't get anything to work last year. And why would it be easier if the code is getting more stringent? Well, the reason why it's easier is because our baseline is making it easier for us to do that. Okay. So let's see. From the compliance process, it's not kind of a one-way street. It's not just on jurisdictions, right? There's all of us are kind of playing in this role, right, of compliance. I mean, overall, we have CEC and kind of setting the standards in the first place, and then they're adopted by jurisdictions who are generally doing the enforcement. But then as, you know, trades or architects or general contractors, our role in this is to we understand the standards. We may be submitting documents, whether it's for permit or installation verification. And so it's all interrelated in terms of making sure we comply with the code or even exceed compliance with the code so we have excellent buildings. So this I just put up here. I'm going to pull over, I think, a larger one because I can do it a little bit easier. You'll see it. We're going to talk about this, but you know, the compliance process here, as we think about it, we're going to be starting with either the performance approach or prescriptive approach, and depending on what you choose, right? I'm either going to be looking at those tables that I showed you earlier or the compliance software. And this is all going to be handled by the energy consultant, who's then going to compile it into the plans, right? Which then gets submitted to the jurisdiction to say, here's my CF1R for prescriptive, or here's my CF1R for performance. Here's the plans that align with it. Then once the permit is issued, then we're into field inspections. And we'll have a number of different inspections here, whether it's just by installers over here that we're calling non-HERS measures, or we'll have inspections done over here with HERS measures, which means they require a third-party verifier to do it. And then there's also the building inspector. May also be considered a third-party verifier who will be looking at specific aspects. So with that kind of overarching process, let's look at this next slide. So we can talk about how does, if we think about kind of the submittals and we think about these forms, how do these forms fit into this process and what should we be expecting? So at plan review, right? Jurisdictions are going to be getting the CF1R, whether it's performance or prescriptive, as I mentioned. It's going to be submitted with the plans for the permit. We're going to make sure that it's showing energy code compliance. And it's really the energy consultant working with the design team to figure out which pathway they're going to do, whether it's prescriptive or performance, what makes the most sense for that scope of work. So at plan review, all you should be looking at is the CF1R. Maya and I were having this conversation yesterday, and she was saying, you know, sometimes I've been asked for a 2R during a plan review. She's like, I can't show a 2R during a plan review, because if we look at this document, you know, this graph here, a 2R comes at the installation period, right? A 2R is going to be, this is a document verifying installation. And those 2Rs are done by the installer, right? Whoever is responsible for that. Then we have kind of a second level of verification, which I put under here. It's like third party kind of final inspection. Shouldn't necessarily say final, I should say third party inspection. And that comes from either the building inspector, right? They're not doing any work. They're looking at the project to make sure it complies. And they may be leveraging those 2Rs from the installers to understand what did the installer say was installed. Great, this is what I'm looking at in the field. The other third-party inspector, as I mentioned earlier, is a HERS rater. So we have particular measures in the code, and we'll see some of those in a moment, that require a third party to look at them, like quality insulation installation. And they'll be taking the installer documents and then doing a second check on it. So just take a look at here, plan review, we're on 1Rs only, installation, 2Rs from installers. Third party comes from the building inspector. They're not doing any formal forms, but HERS raters will complete 3Rs. Maya, is there anything you wanted to add to that in terms of kind of your thoughts there?
No, I think you captured everything I was going to add. So
Sorry.
Yeah, I think you got it.
So given that kind of framing, kind of for the different forms, let's just take a look at them for a moment. There's a lot of them. It's multiple pages in the appendix of all the compliance documents. One, the good news is they're electronic, so that's really great. Two, with HERS registries, like saying they are electronic, and they're also, the HERS registries help us organize them so we know what's available and what's specific to a project. And so you're not kind of wading through piles of forms of trying to figure out which one do I really need to do. So if we talk about the CF1Rs first, just highlighted the first one because again, this is the performance approach one, CF1R Perf 1. If we're looking at residential, and this is what you're most commonly going to see. The next two, the other two CF1Rs there, the second and third bullet are really for additions over 1,000 square feet or under 1,000 square feet. So you may see those as well. Again, probably you'll see them again for additions if that's the type of projects that are coming across the counter or you're submitting to a jurisdiction. And the other two are alterations. So just at a point of reference, if you want more information on HERS documentation, that's another training, but you can see just in terms of our number structure, we've got the CF1R, you'll see this consistent number, 1R, right? So that's our compliance certificates up front. And then the middle section there kind of giving you whether it's performance or addition or alteration, and then the numbering of the form itself. When you're doing the prescriptive path, there also may be some additional CF1R documents. They're worksheets, and they're really to kind of go through the calculations and walk you through the process to demonstrate compliance. So just put this up here for a reference so you can see some of it's a lot for envelope or solar zone area where those are some minimum requirements. Here, I do want to talk about kind of I have two slides here on 2Rs, right? Going back to the installation documents. I just grouped them by type, right? Envelope, we've got 3 of them there, lighting, just 1, mechanical 4, PV 1, plumbing 3. Just so you can see kind of the categories that these fall under in terms of what you're expecting or could expect. These are also, as you notice at the top, non-HERS measures. So the number for the form has this -E, which means if I'm getting an installation document from the installers on fenestration and windows, if we look over here at this top one under envelope, that's all I'm going to get. No HERS rater is going to be looking at this, no other third-party verification. So if it's an important aspect, as we'll see kind of as Maya and I take you through the top 10, then the building inspector is going to be the only other person who's going to be verifying that install. Okay. If we look at this list, and it's only 3 columns here, and you can see there's a lot of mechanical ones. These are all HERS measures where these are our 2Rs, so they still will come from the installer, right? So the mechanical ones will come from the HVAC contractor, the mechanical contractor. But you can see they have a -H, which means I'm going to expect to see a 3R from a HERS rater. So these are done for kind of the measures within the code that are kind of heavier levers in terms of compliance that we're getting a third party verified performance on it from a HERS rater. It also means from a building department and compliance standpoint, this is the opportunity to kind of lean on these HERS verification documents to aid in your compliance. So spoiler alert, we're already telling you exactly what we're going to go through here. Here's our top 10 list that we've got. How we're going to structure this, I'm going to take you through the first 5 and Maya's going to take you through the last 5. So what we did was just try to think about, as, both in our role in terms of looking at CF1Rs when we're reviewing them for a project or even submitting them, and kind of looking at Maya's experience in terms of submitting them and what comments are getting back, and how do we kind of navigate this in the best way, because it's at the least under residential it's 12 pages, right? It's a 12-page document, and so as well as I've got a full set of plans. So can I think about this in terms of kind of maximizing all of our time, whether or not you're on the design team and you're getting something from an energy consultant, or your plan review, or you're a building inspector. Like, how do we kind of prioritize our time? So that's our lens. So let's kind of take you through that. First off, I just want to point out a couple resources for you. If you all are not familiar with Energy Code ACE, they've got a number of different resources out there, and they have kind of 2 checklists, one's for plans examiners and one's for building inspectors. They are dynamic. So those may be tools you want to kind of look at and check out to, aid in your process. So I just want to call those out if folks have not seen those yet or are not familiar with them. And we have a link of resources at the end with the URLs where these resources are. So don't worry, you will have that available to you. Okay. So I was mentioning earlier, like, we're going to go through these things, and as some of you were putting in kind of your role in the chat, I see there are some architects in here. I know we have some energy consultants. We have some jurisdictional staff, general contractor. So how do you think about this? If you're on the project team, you may be looking at the CF1R to understand where there's consistency between the plans and the document the energy consultant produced, to be like, okay, we're on track, and you can kind of minimize any potential conflicts during construction so there's no confusion. It also helps you achieve like expected results. Great, my plans match with that. I'm going to get the building I expect to get. So these are tools for you guys to think about it in that regard. And then plan checkers and building inspectors, you're looking at, does it meet or beat the code requirements? How does that line up for all the things that are really important to get that expected performance out of the building? Are we achieving those intended outcomes by looking at some of these high priority things? So that's just a lens for you to think about. Up in the right-hand corner of the slides, you'll see are these kind of icons. One is just kind of information only. 2, we were trying to call out with the little eye there, if like, this is an important thing for the field. And the other kind of checklist paper there is like, this is really an item for plan check. So keep those in mind as we kind of go through. So let's talk overall compliance first. So I think this is, you get your plans, or you're looking at the CF1R from the consultant on the project design team. You're like, okay, let me just kind of look through this and get my head around what's happening with this project general in terms of compliance. So first off, just in general, I'm going to make sure that all the pages are consecutive, 1 through 12, and calculation and date are consistent through that. And it's registered, it's registered, doesn't have that kind of not for compliance watermark across it. I'm also just going to double check the results for compliance in my EDR, right? If I'm designing a building, I want to make sure that it's actually meeting the code or exceeding the code if that's what I need to do for certain funding or different other aspects. So previously I'd mentioned that there's 2 EDRs, and you can see them here on this kind of example from our Title 24, our CF1R, the standard design in the top row, our proposed design.
Hey.
The proposed design here, where we can see the energy efficiency EDR. So here it's lower than my standard, so that's excellent. The total EDR, so that includes my PV or battery if I happen to have that on this particular project. And then my compliance margins over on the right, as long as these are positive, 0 or above, I'm complying with code. So you can kind of look at that. So again, plan reviewer, right, or project design team, you can make sure things are in good order. The next 2 slides are on special.
Amy.
Yes.
Oh, I have one thing to add just on the last
please,
slide.
Maya.
So especially since it looks like we have some architects on the call, it is just helpful to kind of be able to look at this and know really what you're looking at. So with the efficiency EDR, that can often be what we're looking at for certain like funding requirements. So often we might have a higher efficiency EDR than our total EDR. So kind of just be aware that sometimes we'll be looking towards the efficiency EDR for certain funding, or maybe like a lead program anything like that. Whereas the total is often not reviewed in that context. So just they're both important for kind of different reasons, and your energy consultant will know which one to guide you to, but just be aware that they kind of both play their own role.
Cool. Thank you, Maya. And so if you look at that, the other 2 pieces, just kind of overall on the CF1R kind of summary you want to look at is required special features, as well as HERS measures. What that does is, one, it makes sure like if you're anticipating something from the project design team, like a battery, right? You can see as a good example called out here, or like a heated slab or slab insulation, kind of some of these special features. Or if you there's a summary of HERS measures in there. So both of these are really valuable to look at. To one, is something listed that you expect to be listed? So then you can also confirm that it matches with the plans. On the HERS measures, as a project team, you're going to be like, okay, we got to make sure we have these verified, right, for compliance. From the plan check and from the field, from the building inspector side, one, you know what forms to expect, right? Because it's telling you right here that you're going to be seeing 3 Rs for these particular features. And again, you can lean on those to aid in your kind of verification of compliance for a project. So with these things, I kind of get a sense of like the building's overall complying. That's great. I've got a number of HERS measures, so I'm going to be seeing some other documentation coming down the line from the plan check, even though today I'm only seeing the 1 Rs. And I've got some special features, and I expect to see a battery. The last thing overall is you just want to make sure, it's signed, and it's a completed kind of certified document, CF1R. The other thing I pointed out here is this area here where you can have a CEA, Certified Energy Analyst number. And that's important. Maya was mentioning like LEED programs or Green Point rated or REACH codes. And in some cases, having a CEA complete your Title 24 gives you additional kind of credit or value in each of those aspects. All right. So that was my kind of overall compliance. I'm feeling pretty good. I kind of know what's expected. It's complying. I know HERS measures. I know special features. It's a certified document. Now let's start getting into the details. So on the general information, there's 21 items here. That's a number of things for you to be looking at, but we're only going to be looking at kind of 7 of them. So first is climate zone. We definitely want to make sure this matches. Energy code, as you all know, or maybe our requirements and our thresholds are set by our climate zones because we have different heating and cooling loads, and I'll show you that in a moment. We want to make sure we know what building type it is. and that matches the plans. This also, we were talking about different jurisdictions that have reach codes. It also has different requirements. And new construction, what should I expect to be seeing? Then I'm gonna expect to see the CF1R versus an addition, right? Or alteration. Total condition floor area, we'll talk about this later. Generally want to make sure it's reasonable. We'll talk about wall areas that are a little bit more important in a moment. But I want to make sure generally my wall areas, the number of dwelling units and the number of stories are there. Those things are going to affect performance. So if it's 2 stories, I want to make sure I actually have a 2-story building and not a 1-story building, right? That's going to give me a different load profile. And my condition floor area should be in the realm of reason. You're going to hear mine. I say that a lot, within the realm of reason. That's reasonable. We're not looking for exact. We're looking for close. I also highlighted the glazing percentage here. We're going to talk about fenestration and glazing collectively, like our 6th item, I think. So just put this up here in terms of impacts for climate zone, because we have different allowances. Again, I had mentioned that in our code, right, we have an electric and a mixed fuel baseline. And so depending on, there's a little corner in 3C Ren that's 16. But even if we're just looking down kind of the base loads for all electric, as an example, in single family, they vary by climate zone. So what you're allowed is going to shift. So we want to make sure that in multifamily is the same thing. You can see kind of a shift here of 5 to 9, right? I have a greater allowance in climate zone 5 than I do in 9. So it gives me more room for my budget. We also have minimum requirements for solar heat gain that are based on climate zone. So again, the back end of that performance software is setting these thresholds based on the climate zone, and that sets your allowable budget. So we want to make sure that is accurate. The next 2 items I bundled together, PV and battery. So 2 things. One, they do show up on the CF1R. We talked about it. We saw it earlier, kind of in our special features. But then we'll also see it show up here for required PV systems. I mentioned earlier that PV is required for low-rise residential, which means generally we'll probably see, I don't know, 2.5 to 3.2 kilowatt systems, somewhere in that range. Nothing particularly large. And so you'll see it called out here. We've got the azimuth, we've got the tilt. We can see kind of the type of array, whether it's tracking or not, the efficiency of the inverter. So we got some basic information here. I'll go to the next slide. Then in addition, we also have the battery system called out here with the control, which is basic. There's also a time of use setting and our capacity. Again, some of this you can match to ensure that if they're leveraging these pieces to hit a total EDR efficiency, that you want to make sure these are aligned. In addition, if for reach codes, if the mixed fuel project is looking to achieve higher performance than an all electric, these are also aspects that are leveraged for that higher performance. And the reason why they're kind of important to look at is they do have a pretty good impact on overall performance. And if you may recall or not, should have put a note here, PV and battery are not inspected by HERS raters. You're only going to get a 2R from the installer. And so then the building inspector is going to be the only person who's looking at it. And so generally on the jurisdictional side and compliance side, when we've looked at PV in the past, and still, we're going to be looking at bonding and labeling and disconnect and all of these super critical safety features. But now as we're kind of looking at it as a part of compliance too, and expected performance, we may also be looking at like, all right, does that equipment match what's installed? That's kind of like a right number of panels. General verification there. It's also really important, I'd say, as the installer, just to verify that it's all installed properly. We have seen projects where the inverters, for some reason, have not been set properly. And so half the PV system, the inverters were set to 0. And so it was not operating properly. So again, we want to see those 2 R's. We want installers to do that verification. And as a project team, I want to know that, all right, it's in good standing and ready to go. Lastly is the battery system. There are forms from the installer who's not required to verify CEC certification. That's done by the manufacturer, but the batteries are meeting JA13. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Christopher. JA12. I think I maybe had heat pump water heaters on my mind. JA13 is heat pump water heaters. My apologies. JA12 requirements. You want to make sure the battery actually exists. It's installed. And then whether or not it's in which of the 2 control strategies, or basic or time of use. So I will correct this before we send this out. But that's kind of overall on battery, PV and battery. And again, because of the changes in the code, right now that we get credit for storage and PV is required, we're going to be seeing a lot more. And we may be seeing a lot more with kind of if folks are doing more all electric because of the benefit that these provide in terms of offsetting your use. So I think there's definitely be more to come in terms of battery systems and controls, and storage will be something that evolves over, it's evolved quickly and will evolve over the next code cycle as well. Okay. And last for me, before I hand it over to Maya, is just areas and orientation, which I touched on previously. So as you're looking at the plans, we're going to be looking at all of those surfaces, right? And you can see over here, I've got my front wall, left wall, right? I've got my azimuth, so I know which orientation, right? It's showing me to, versus like, what's the front? Okay, that's north. There's my orientation, and here's my gross area. So these should be checked, right? And again, within the realm of requirements, right? Within some reasonableness. Maybe it's 10%, maybe it's 20%. You got to think about it. We want it close, because if we kind of think about kind of the impact of it in the solar path, right? That's going over a house. Each of those walls are going to have different solar gains. Or lack of solar gains, which are going to affect our heating and cooling loads, right? And compliance. And so as I kind of take this house and spin it around, I'm going to have different areas. So this is, right, if I'm looking straight on here, the other side is north. So you can see my south side that's facing us. That area changes as I kind of spin that house around, which is definitely going to affect my potential loads that are in my budget. So what you want to do is make sure that they're reasonable. It doesn't have to be exact. Don't send something back if it's, you know, a handful of square feet off. We're looking for something that's going to be magnitude that's going to have an impact on compliance overall in this area. So again, it may be, you know, if it's within 10%, somewhere in there, maybe that's fine. Greater than that, you may be like, oh, we want to kind of get this corrected and verified. So with that, I'm going to go to Fenestration and Glazing and hand it over to Maya for the remainder of our top 10.
Thanks, Amy. All right, so diving into windows, if you want to click on the next slide. So there are a few locations that we're going to be looking for when it comes to glazing or fenestration. So the first one is really helpful all the way at the top in that general information section. So you'll have the glazing percentage called out and also the average U factor. And U factor in SHGC is really helpful and critical with really any size building in its compliance. So we do want to make sure that the U factor is within the realm of reason, and also it kind of aligns with what we're actually seeing on the plan set. And then the other section is the actual glazing and fenestration section, which will be further down on the CF1R. And this, we're just showing a snippet, but if it is like a larger building, like maybe even a multifamily property, this could be a whole page dedicated to just windows. So you'll have to kind of review each of them, look at the area, U factor, SHGC, and then we'll also want to see that the source is NFRC rated. And if it's not, we'll kind of want to take a note and think about why maybe it's not NFRC rated, the default value. All right, next slide. So for the glazing percentage that was back up at on the general section, we'll want to be sure that we're calculating the glazing percentage ourselves as a plan checker in order to compare it to what the CF1R says. And this is because the glazing area has a really large impact on energy compliance. And because it performs worse than a wall, like a wall assembly would, we want to be sure that that ratio and like percentage is pretty close to what we're calculating ourselves. So this might be a little bit challenging for a larger building, but especially for a smaller one, this is really achievable to quickly calculate. So you can add up all the glass area and divide that by the total conditioned floor area that's provided in the CF1 in that general section. So I think the next slide has an example. So here we have an example of all of the areas kind of calculated out for yourself. You divide that, you add all of those up, divide that by the floor area, and you'll get your glazing percentage. So the number in the CF1R should not be lower than what you calculate, because that could indicate that they're not modeling all of the windows at the building. But it is okay if their number is a little bit higher. For example, maybe if anything, that would be more kind of conservative. In general, when it comes to windows, like we want to be within like maybe even like 10% would be a pretty good range within what you're calculating. You know, a lot higher and a lot lower, there's probably something off. Maybe a window was forgotten or extra were added. And I just want to note that sometimes the areas and dimensions are written on the plan set, but sometimes they're not, so that you'd have to reference that window schedule and match that up with the window tag. So you can go about it a couple different ways. All right, next slide. Okay, great. So this is how that the main fenestration table looks. So you'll see we have the orientation and azimuth, and as well as the area. And so this is a secondary way to gut check that window area and if it's assigned to the correct. So we just kind of calculated the overall glazing percentage, but we want to also make sure that area is assigned to the correct orientation. And one thing I'll call out is that the azimuth is really what can be the most helpful. The front, left, right, and back, it can also be useful. But if the azimuth is at like 45 degrees, if they have, you know, a bunch of different funky angles on the property, they won't have an orientation assigned. So just pay maybe more attention to that azimuth and the area that's assigned to it. All right, next slide. And then on the same exact table that you also have your U factor and SHGC, like I was mentioning. And so we'll want to be sure that you, likely everything will probably be NFRC rated, and you want to also have those labels still intact on the windows during your field inspection. So if this is not in the plans, be sure to request that it's added. And then just a general note with U factor and SHGC, again, you're likely the windows, you know, this will be, again, with a performance pathway, but likely the windows are going to be pretty close to whatever the prescriptive requirement is for that climate zone. So that's also something to compare against. And generally, the lower the number, the better. So And there's also kind of within reason. So if the SHGC is like 0.1, does that window really exist? So you'll kind of want to double check that the plan set matches the CF1R and also matches kind of a real possible window. Amy, do you have anything to add? Mm-hmm.
I don't have anything to add. I think you covered that well. And I just wanted to ask you a question that came up here. So, and which is also something, I think we'll talk about this again later. Do windows in garage or non-conditioned space count in the glazing percentage?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that would be the windows, I believe it's only in relation to the conditioned floor area. So we would, so going back, to that example, we would, I believe we would exclude any garage windows.
Great. Yeah.
Okay.
And also, if you look kind of here, kind of our denominator is conditioned floor area. So that's also our indicator that we're looking for the impact of the size of the window and the orientation of it as it relates to the potential for, solar heat gain, and how it's going to affect kind of the loads of that particular home, whether they're heating or cooling loads, right? Our space conditioning loads overall. Great.
Exactly.
Let me get you back up to here.
Great. Yeah. So moving on to insulation, now that we have all our kind of windows all sorted, we'll then want to move into the wall assemblies and the insulation. Next slide. All right. So for the wall assemblies, that's going to be, I believe it's right after the windows, and it'll be called opaque surface constructions. And so on the left-hand side, we have our construction name. And then on the right, we'll have the, construction type, framing, also the surface type. And those are all kind of equally important. But one thing that when it comes to energy compliance, what really matters ultimately is the R value of any cavity insulation or interior exterior continuous insulation. So those will be the two kind of core things you'll be looking at. And one thing I always recommend double checking is the assembly layers. So sometimes this construction name, so you can see in this example, the construction name doesn't match exactly what the R value is. And while ideally everything matches, all the names match exactly what the plan set walls are, but if in the event that they don't, you can always reference this total R value and also each of the assembly layers to verify kind of what wall they're talking about and the insulation there. Okay.
Yeah. And I just add, I think, these are kind of, there's some default values in there. So these are just kind of showing up as text names under construction name. So if you see something here and it's not consistent with this is not going to affect compliance at all. It's not being built into the model assumptions. It's what's under here, as Maya was saying. So really look at this, and I wouldn't worry about that variation. Just these are the important pieces over here of what's expected in the project. Sorry, go ahead, Maya.
Oh no, I think that was great. Thanks. All right, next slide. All right, so here we just wanted to call out that that R21 is the minimum R value for exterior walls. So, and also in general, there can be a couple different R value or insulation levels that are put in different assembly types. So for example, like in this 2x6 wall, you could either put in a R21 or an R19, and it'll depend, and they can look identical, like even in the installation, but the R value will be pretty different. So it is really important to look for the insulation, like it's likely stamped on the insulation itself, or be sure during verification to kind of take a look at any available product that's being installed. And you can lean often on HERS verification, if they are doing QII for the project, you can lean on that to confirm that it really was indeed R21 installed versus R19, because that again was a shift in the latest code cycle. Alrighty, next slide. So this is just a quick note, and this kind of ties in with the earlier question about unconditioned spaces. So just a general rule of thumb, unconditioned spaces have very little to no impact on energy compliance. So while it is great to maybe insulate your garage walls for comfort, perhaps, it won't really have any sort of impact on the energy compliance. So, and same with windows. So while we want to make sure everything is aligning with the plan set, it's not going to be critical to the compliance. All right, next slide. So here is the next, so after the wall section will be the attic and the roof. So this is helpful to kind of lay out the construction type, if it's a ventilated attic, so the type, a couple other roof values, and then also whether it's a cool roof and if it has a radiant barrier. So this may or may not be important depending on the climate zone you're operating in, but we did just want to call it out that this is a measure that would need to be inspected by the building inspector. And Amy, so it's correct that it's the CF2R-E form that would be relevant here.
Correct. Yeah, they'd only be seeing an installer form. So yeah, then the building inspector can verify that in the final.
Right. Yeah. So there's no third-party verification for this, but right. it is a credit.
Correct.
Okay. Great. So moving on to water heaters, you can go on to the next slide. All right. So here we have a bunch of information. So the first section will be kind of a general description of the type of water heating at the property. So it'll include the type as well as the number of water heaters. So this can be really critical if you have, let's say you know that there's in-unit heat pump water heaters and there's 50 units, but you only see 40 water heaters up here. That could be an indication that something isn't quite matching up. So that's something to kind of look out for, as well as a call out there for HERS verification. The next section will dig into a little bit more detail about the exact water heater. So it'll have the energy factor, the input rating, and then the tank insulation. So all of those are very critical and definitely have a big impact on compliance. So we want to make sure they all match the plan set and also all match during the verification portion of the project. And then the bottom section is probably the most helpful when it comes to the HERS, what's going to be HERS verified. So it calls out if the pipe insulation is going to be HERS verified, parallel piping, or compact distribution. If any of those items are going to be HERS verified, it'll be listed here. And again, you can lean on those HERS tests to reduce your own inspections. And another note that if it is relevant to find the fuel type, that will be here under the heating element type. So if that's relevant as well. All right, next slide. Oh, we do have, again, mentioning the heat pump water heaters. So there's two kind of critical things. I think this translates to most water heaters, but especially heat pump water heaters. So you'll have, if it's an NEEA heat pump brand and model number, that is a huge boost in compliance credit. And so it would be listed here, and it is really important to confirm that that's on the plan set and that's what was installed. And then additionally, that tank location is also really critical to the heat pump water heater performance. So we will want to confirm that. I think on the next slide, we have an example kind of what that looks like. So so on the left, we have an unconditioned zone for a heat pump water heater. And again, this is, in a garage, even exterior, anything not in that thermal envelope, that would be unconditioned. And then versus conditioned, we're looking at maybe a closet near the kitchen, hallway, etc. That would be our conditioned zone heat pump water heaters. And again, we'll just want to make sure that is consistent throughout.
And Maya, quick question here.
Mm-hmm.
One thing too, or comment, and you can respond, is that we can see the location of it and confirm easily based on what you showed earlier on that CF1R where the location is. But for the NEA rated, right, the Northeast Energy Efficiency Alliance Tier 3, we're going to have to look at the nameplate data. Is that kind of correct? Because I can't tell it as I'm standing here. So
yeah,
will I be
absolutely.
comparing those?
Yeah, that's a really good point. That for the field inspection, you'll want to look at the nameplate anyway to confirm the brand, the model, and if it should say on it, and also the input efficiency, all of that should be on that nameplate. So it'll be super helpful to look there as well. Good point. Thanks, Amy. All right, moving on to HVAC. The next section, next slide. So this should be right after the DHW. You'll have, again, similar to how we had for our water heating system, have kind of just a general breakdown of the heating system type. So in this example, it's a central gas furnace, or it might be a mini split heat pump. It's whatever the system type, it'll be listed there. It'll also have the number of units. So again, this goes, if it's a single family, it'll likely just be one. If it's multifamily, you might have a certain number, so you want to make sure that matches the number of units. And you'll also have your heating efficiency type and efficiency. And this will be something to compare against the plan set and also verify that was actually installed at the site. So, and then for the heating type, again, it'll have each of the number of units, the efficiency in EAR and SEER, as well as some additional information, and if it's going to be HERS verified. It also will have a HERS verification section, which is super helpful. So it'll call out all of the various items that will be HERS verified, if it's required or not required. And again, you can lean on these verifications and testing as well. I don't have anything else here. Do you have any comments, Amy? No? Okay. So moving on to the duct work. So if there's ducting at this system, it will be helpful to know the duct insulation location, and if there's insulation on these ducts and to what R value, as that will likely need to be, or that will be likely HERS verified, but it'll also be helpful to verify in the field as well. And with this HERS verification, you can see there's a bunch of different credit that is really critical for these ducts. So they're almost always going to be, the duct leakage will be verified and it even outlines that target. So that will be critical to confirm. And then you can see there's a couple other credits that may or may not be taken, including the location and if there's the special low leakage air handler or low leakage ducts in conditioned space. So I think on the next slide we have some examples, perhaps, of the.
Yeah. I'll go to the next slide, and just to reiterate too,
Okay.
I've said this and I see it in the chat too, that within our code there's mandatory duct leakage, so you'll expect on every project you'll at least have duct leakage verification. And then you'll have, and it will show you the target here that's required. And then these others may be optional ones that are kind of leveraged for compliance. But we have mandatory duct
Definitely.
leakage. Perfect. Oh, there you go.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, here's just an example of some various options for where your duct work might be. So on the right side, we have very clearly unconditioned duct work. And then on the left-hand side, we have conditioned, because in this example, what we're kind of demonstrating is that the insulation was at that roof level. So this is within the thermal boundary. So this would be considered conditioned duct work. And then you can also see in this middle, which is probably often more standard, where we're looking at that insulation on the floor of the attic with the ductwork above. And in this case, that would be, it would be outside the thermal boundary. So this would be unconditioned as well. All right. Next slide, unless Amy, you had any other comments or any questions? No? Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay,
Amy,
so moving on. Oh, go ahead.
Amy, the CEC doesn't consider the left picture ducts and kitchen space unless you're actually conditioning it. If there's conditioning going on in there, that is no longer conditioned space, and in their determination never has been. You have to have it below the lid. So we've had that conversation.
This is semi-conditioned space, and then if this was soffitted, right, within the condition.
Correct. Below
Or,
yeah, you're right. Sorry, I didn't mean to make a big deal out of it, but.
No, I appreciate it, Dave. Does that?
Yeah, I appreciate that clarification. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so for example, let's just say in an example, like maybe if this ductwork for whatever reason was part of a room that did have a dedicated like air handler to it, that would be a better example for a clearly conditioned space. Thank you. All righty, so moving on to mechanical ventilation. Next slide. So here in this example, we have we're looking closely at the indoor air quality fans. So and I think this example does not have an HRV, so that IAQ recovery effectiveness is 0. But something to look out for as they become more common are heat recovery ventilation systems. So that HRVs are, again, could be being at play here and can really boost your compliance. So that's something to consider here and confirm that heat recovery effectiveness and verify, again, that it matches the plan set as well. And these, the HERS rater will always inspect these mechanical ventilation systems and measure airflow. So this will be really helpful to reference that CF3R and again, verify or leverage that kind of verification and review that during that whole inspection process.
Awesome. Okay, so that's our top 10. We can take, I'm going to go through quickly through some best practices and resources. And then we would love to hear, and if there's any kind of thoughts there, you know, from folks about what you're maybe seeing or hearing that may relate or complement or show a different scenario in terms of compliance. And then we'll have our poll. So just to kind of recap, hopefully Maya and I have kind of hit on these as we were kind of going through the different kind of aspects, but then comparing the CF1R from the project team prior to submission for permit is great. One, you can there's no conflict, there's no confusion amongst the construction team. the energy consultant has built the model as you have the plan, so you have the right performance expectation of performance. So kind of do that review and kind of make sure things are correct. And then also, again, you don't have that confusion. Make sure the CF1R is registered. Again, that means it's getting into the system, and then you have that opportunity to leverage HERS registry for the 2Rs and the 3Rs and kind of see what's actually required. I know Maya has talked about times, again, when sometimes she'll get requests for 2Rs or that don't relate to the scope of the specific project or kind of the systems that are being installed. So this will help navigate that. Make sure they've got the HERS certificates. We heard a lot about kind of leveraging those. We'll always, QII is now in the baseline, so you probably always see that. We've got duct leakage, we've got indoor air quality, so probably a minimum of 3. And then we called out these things in the field. We know there's a lot of stuff to look at in the field, particularly for compliance for building inspectors, but some of these kind of heavy hitters in terms of energy code compliance are good for you to check as well. And from the project team, you can also do that check yourself as well prior to building inspection, right? Till your final to be like, okay, are we hitting that? And the SO is for ducted furnace systems. We also will have airflow and fan launch draws required HERS verification. So there's a number of HERS verifications, particularly on the mechanical ventilation. We saw that huge list of options there, and many of them are required. Here's the resources, and you'll have this list, mandatory measures, prescriptive tables, and those energy code checklists that we shared with you. So so there's one single prescriptive package. Nope, you guys, most of you got it right, 83%. Sorry for the spelling that may have confused you on that one. We now have the single family and multifamily prescriptive packages. CF3Rs are completed by the installers. Incorrect. It's the 3Rs are done by the HERS raters. 2Rs are done by installers, right? So just remember that 1, 2, 3. 1 plan check, 2 installing is happening first, and the final kind of phase is 3, which is kind of verification. So you can kind of, they're numbered that way to kind of help us keep that in line. The important data points for impacting energy compliance, we heard this, as Maya was going through kind of the spaces and the glazing, right? Window glazing and climate zone are important, in the water heater specifications. Unconditioned spaces aren't affecting that compliance because they're not getting our kind of condition load. So we're less concerned, again, about the garage or other places. And HERS inspections required for PV and battery? No. No HERS inspections required for that. It's all just installer only, which is why we may want to be paying more attention to it. All right. Any other final things to add, Maya, or questions from the group before? Let me see if there's any.
Yeah, and you can, we'll be on for a few more moments here, and please feel free to chat in any last questions that come up. And Amy and Maya can respond to them as well. And Amy, would you mind also launching the last kind of course training evaluation poll too?
Yes.
I'll have that run through a few last slides.
Okay.
Thank you so much. And
yes.
Yeah, just want to thank Amy and Maya one more time. That was a great course, one that we've offered previously, and I thought, even improved upon this time. And I think those slides will be a great kind of written resource as well for you folks to be able to reference as well. So we'll make sure we send those out to you as well.
And
yeah.
Sean, I just launched the poll.
Perfect.
So please do that. And I will say, there's only so many questions we can include like in a poll in Zoom that's like rating things, and it doesn't give you the opportunity to be like, oh, I really like this, or this would be a really awesome addition. So if you have those, you could send them to Sean, you could send them to me, like So we want to hear those, even though our poll can't accommodate that type of structure within Zoom. So I just want to put that out there. We love getting feedback so we can provide better and resources that really serve you and really help you all. So turn it back over to you, Sean. Sorry.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Amy and Maya. Perfect. Next slide. Just a reminder, so we're able to connect with Amy and Maya through 3C Ren, and 3C Ren is working to improve energy efficiency in our region. We're a collaboration between San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties to improve energy efficiency and the support we can offer building professionals and households in our region. Next slide. So 3C Ren brings some of the ratepayer dollars that you already pay on your utility bills back to the Central Coast through kind of the organizational cycle you see on the image right there, with the intent to kind of invest some of those funds back into our communities and specifically support energy in our region. Beautiful. And then this year, specifically, just like Amy and Maya's presentation, kind of approached residential compliance from a perspective of a plan checker or an architect. We're also trying to approach energy and energy efficiency from kind of a comprehensive community approach and really engage all of the partners in our region, whether that's public sector, private sector, or everyday kind of community members to understand how energy and buildings intersect. These are our 3 programs. I'll touch on them just shortly on the next few slides. Awesome. So Energy Code Connect. Energy Code Connect is the program for specifically the energy code through which this training was offered, working across both public and private sectors to address both residential and non-residential applications. We have 3 services: the Energy Code Coach, which if you have any questions as well from today's presentation, would highly recommend you seek out our Energy Code Coach. That information's on our website, which will be up in a moment. Offer trainings and support. So we use some of those ratepayer dollars to get in touch with great instructors like Amy and Maya and have them come and present to us and share that knowledge. And then regional forums, we have one coming up in March, which is a bit of a broader opportunity to discuss energy and some of the policy around it on the Central Coast. Perfect. Next slide. And then building performance training. You probably wouldn't notice a difference between, on the website between the Energy Code Connect programs and the building performance training programs, but building performance training is a little broader. We get to focus on high performance buildings as a whole, not just on the energy code, and also offers some technical skills and soft skills and serve both students looking to enter the industry and folks that have been in the industry but looking to kind of brush up on skills. Awesome. Next slide. And I would highly encourage you, if you are interested in more of the events and trainings, the Energy Code Coach, which you can ask more code questions to please check out the website. That's 3c-ren.org. Awesome. And just a little wrap up on logistics for today. I will reach out to you if you were able to add your AIA or ICC kind of number to the registration portal. We'll get those out to you. If you did not add your number, your membership number, just contact me. My email is on the screen there, and we can sort that out. And we'll share these slides from today's presentation out. Those are a great resource. So thank you so much, Amy and Maya. And then coming up next week, We have a course on residential alterations that's taught by Russ King from CalCerts. Also touches on some of the HERS ratings courses. We have heat pump water heaters for energy code, specifically for the public sector, building staff may find that interesting. And then passive house basics, that's a quick 1 hour intro course on passive house we're excited to bring you. And ventilation 101, and a great building blocks course to start discussing ventilation. But you can find all those courses online, 3c-ren.org. Please visit the website. Highly encourage. Awesome. I think that's all we have today. Again, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. I hope you found something valuable in today's training, and want to thank Amy and Maya one more time for joining us today. And thank you guys as well.
Great. Yep. Thank you all very much for spending your morning with us.
Yep,
Awesome.
thank you.
Bye, everybody. Have a great day.